we are officially live. Like at first we were fake live, but now I think we are officially live on the real live. All right. So
I like it.
all right, what's going on, guys? Tonight's live conversation is brought to you by myself and Mr. Dr. Tim Swiger. And we are two veterans who are discussing taking the cape off. What does that look like? What does that mean? And how has this plagued our small, very, very small community of veterans when we are facing this pandemic? But it's not the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. It's this, I want to call it a recovery pandemic, recovering from combat, recovering from being ourselves, recovering from the trauma that you go through transitioning from service to civilian life. And how has this honestly, impacted both of us, and how we're getting through it. And we're going to give you some practical steps towards, in this process on how to get through certain things. My co-producer right here, Mr. Tim Swiger, he is a certified PhD holder. So y'all know it's gonna come straight from the doctor's mouth. So all right, so no pressure though, Tim, no pressure.
Yeah.
So without further ado, I'll let Mr. Tim introduce himself. That way, I don't think it did him enough justice. So Tim, go ahead, man. Tell the people who you are, bro.
Yeah, brother. So, hey, everybody. My name is Tim Swiger. So, technically, Dr. Swiger. I'm a psychologist that primarily focuses on PTSD, combat trauma, and a newer concept that some of you might not be familiar with, which is moral injury. And that's really in the same wheelhouse of PTSD. And we'll talk about that in a different video at a different time. But I'm also a combat veteran. So, as he kind of mentioned at the beginning of this, I did 2 combat tours in Afghanistan. The first was with MARSOC from 2007 to 2008 as part of the 2-2 MU. And then the second one was from 2008 to 2009, and I was with 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines. And so Theo and I, we both kind of talked about this and kind of really just wanted to start to get some conversation around veterans' mental health and what it's like to come home and deal with some of this stuff. And so that's kind of what we're going to do. Theo's going to introduce himself as well and kind of lay out some of what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to bounce it right back to you.
I appreciate that. So unfortunately, this is not going to be your typical veteran conversation because I think there's been too many conversations and not enough solution. This is going to be more solution based, but more so. I haven't talked to Tim in a long time. Like we haven't seen each other in over 10 some odd years, and it's great to see you, bro. And it's I love being able to connect via Zoom, but I think right now more than anything we need a conversation that focuses more so on surviving. I don't even want to say surviving because that gives it a bad twist. I want to say living with whatever you have, but moving forward with the memories without being stuck. So we're gonna touch a little bit about just on certain things. So if at any point you feel uncomfortable watching this, and this is just a disclaimer, if you feel uncomfortable watching this, I urge you to turn it off, take a breather, go outside, take a breather, rewatch it when it's most convenient to you, because I don't want to trigger anybody. And I say that with all sincerely. I think we use the word trigger too often, but in this case, I'm using it because it's a very sensitive, topic, and not many people. I don't want to say not many people, but most people can watch and can hear without reliving certain things. But I urge you, whoever's watching this, in case you feel uncomfortable, please turn this off and go outside, take a breather. So with all that being said, Tim, a while back when we had this conversation and said, hey, let's have this conversation about, what you do. It came clear to me that there is a passion as to why you're doing what you do. So what first got you into, because listen, my wife's doing the whole doctoral thing, it ain't for the weak, bro. Like it ain't no walk in the park. Like that's a lot of schooling. And a lot of people say grunts, we don't really know a whole lot. But to have a grunt that's a PhD holder, like, you know what? My man, there you go. So what got you in this line of work, man? And what inspired you to go through that hell, if you will, to become a PhD holder, to be in this, I don't want to say industry, but in this lane of work?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And so one of the first things I have to throw out there is that everything I present here tonight is based off my clinical experience, my training, and my experiences in the military as well. Um, with that noted, it's not of an organization, it's not of a place I work for, it's not of other people. And these are solely my own views that I'm expressing tonight. But you're right. It's not for the weak. It's not for the faint of heart. To get to this position, it's taken me 10 years. So since I got out of the military, I've been working to this point, 3 degrees, a couple license in the bag. But it's one of those things where I found myself in this unique position serving in the military. And I think many of you all probably felt similarly. You come back from the first deployment and you drink and you see guys using substances and doing whatever they can really do to cope. But all in the same manner, when we were in, there was a very short period of time between our first deployment and the second. And so by the time you factored in training and all these pieces, it was really that what have you done for me lately mentality.
Right.
And
right.
and so, really nobody had time to process or cope or deal. And so when I came back from my second deployment, I started to see a lot of my fellow veterans struggling pretty heavily, including myself. I looked at my family. So not only was I in the Marine Corps, my twin sister was in the Army and deployed to Iraq at the exact same time I went to Afghanistan. My older brother actually on our first deployments were all within 2 weeks of each other. He was in Qatar because he was in the Air Force. And so, one, I have a really strong mom.
Because that's a lot of deployment for.
A lot of deployments.
Listen, I was, for a while there, I was the only one in my family that was in the military, and my deployment was like, my mom was like, "What is going?" Like literally, like it freaked her out. So, bro, shouts out to your mom, man, for for real. That's a strong woman.
That is a strong woman.
Yeah.
You were correct. But to go back to your question, what really got me into it was, so initially it was, I noticed my sister struggling. I was struggling. My brother was still in. And so I didn't even see what was going on with him. But I started losing guys when I got home. I had guys that OD'd. I had guys that took their life. And it finally got to this point where it almost felt surreal if I wasn't getting a phone call and somebody was dying. I think for me, that was where it started. And then to share a little bit, and I've shared this on YouTube as well, but in 2015, that was kind of the epitome, if you will, of I need to be in this field, in this profession, because my brother of 11 and a half years, serving in the Air Force, ended up taking his own life. And so not only did I start to realize how much everybody's struggling, I really started to realize that regardless of who you are, regardless of what position or occupation you had in the military, when you come home, that stuff doesn't leave you. That battle continues and this war continues. And a lot of times what I'm realizing is we're losing it here at home.
Wow. You know what? I hear the term often that we're losing here at home. And it's hard to believe because you think of home being safe, you think of home being home. You don't think of home being twice as dangerous as being overseas. And often enough, I think it's the stuff that we bring back, the luggage that we bring back and don't unpack. Like it's this stigma that we have about getting help because we leave combat and we come home. We go back to our trainings, we go back to our friends, we go back to all our semi-usual normal life. We don't allow ourselves enough time to decompress, and then we and then we take all that stuff with us. Like me and my wife been like, we PCS'd like several times, right? From leaving the Marine Corps to go into the Army. We moved to Hawaii. From Hawaii, we came here to Georgia. There's boxes that still haven't been unpacked, right? And that honestly reminded me of how we come from wherever place we serve, we come home and we have boxes, mental boxes that's still unpacked, right? And then one day, those things start to unravel, but it's usually never expected because we think we're fine, right? And then there's this toxicity about asking for help. I'm going to look weak if I ask for help. Um, I'm a daggone Marine. I shouldn't, you know what I'm saying? Hey, the few the proud, if I ask for help, I'm going to look like the weak one. And we carry this stigma with us all day and all night. We self-medicate and we don't want to reach out. And so it just perpetuates this thing about us and about our culture that we have, our culture being the military culture or the military mindset of suck it up, you be all right, drive on, adapt and overcome, and you be good. I don't think that's working here. Like we talked about this adapt and overcome mentality that we have of, yeah, that works well in combat. That doesn't work here at home. You could try to finagle it, but it doesn't work. So what happens when we come home and we don't have that same support system? Because the same dudes that were cheering us on when we were, in a barracks, chugging beers, are no longer available when we need to talk. When the same dudes that were with us when we're doing all the nonsense, like, jumping off the third floor and doing all this crazy stuff that we're doing a service and we're literally running around the quad, in our silkies yelling because, half of the platoon's drunk. We're having platoon on platoon, brawls out in the daggone quad. These guys are no longer available when you raise your hand and say, hey, I'm struggling. Like, you have this camaraderie while you're in, and then you leave, and then you're like, so I should be able to handle this by myself. So what happens? Like, I know, in the work that you do and, in the studies that you have gone through, like, what is that even called? Like, I just, for the layman person, I just call it, like, ain't nobody around. like literally, that's just what I call it. Like the phone is off the hook. Like, that's it. Like, nobody is around. And then we ridicule each other when somebody asks for help, and we don't know how to cope. So
Yeah.
from your your perspective, how has that played a role in in your transition from the Marine Corps to getting to this point now?
Yeah. So one of the first things I want to kind of say is you're absolutely right. Me and you have talked a little bit about this toxic masculinity in some ways, and I know that's a jargon word, if you will, but really what you're talking about is what you're saying, right? It's an inability to reach out and connect with people when you might need it for fear of the way people will view you, or maybe potentially that ridiculing piece, right? From my studies, being through school for so long, one of the things that I've learned is in the last decade of studying this stuff is what we're doing is failing. So when you really look at it, I mean, hey, call a spade a spade. You guys have played spades a ton, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? It is what it is. Reality is we're not winning, right? We are failing in a lot of ways, and we have ourselves to blame for that. When you start looking at the way we're coping or the way we're dealing, when we hold it all in and we keep it to ourselves, look at the veteran statistics. In a given year, at least 10% of the veteran population. So when we think about OEF, OAF, O&D, our era veterans, there's only about 2.6 million roughly of us. We've just deployed over and over and over again for the last 2 decades.
Wow.
Right? When we come home, 11 to 20% of us are going to develop PTSD or depression in a given year right out the gate. There's been studies to show anywhere from 10 to 47.6 at the high are going to develop an alcohol use disorder. And I'm not saying, a beer on the weekend's a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm guilty. What I am saying is when you're using that as a means to cope, when it's the only way you can sleep at night, so you start using alcohol and then alcohol becomes the problem. You haven't fixed the problem. You've only just made more issues that you've now got to deal with. Look at substance use. I'm from West Virginia. So here, per capita, we have some of the highest opioid use rates here, right? Carfentanil, heroin, these different drugs that are used constantly, right? As a means to manage and sometimes just simply not feel. So when you ask me, how are veterans, dealing with this stuff, a lot of times they're dealing with it alone. Does that make sense?
Wow. Bro, that's a lot. That's for a small community as we have as veterans, like that's a lot. That's a lot that we don't understand. And I'm starting to see more so the Vietnam era veterans now finally getting around to being comfortable talking about what happened and finally being comfortable enough for accepting help. Like the help has always been there, but they're not just getting comfortable accepting like, hey, something is wrong, something doesn't feel right. Like what is the difference between remembering and punishment? Because often enough, I think we punish ourselves because we don't want to lose a memory of a lost loved one, right? And we take ourselves through the gauntlet of I'm not worthy of help. I'm not, I didn't experience enough combat to feel like, oh, I need help. Or hey, I was quote unquote, for the lack of better words, I was a pogue and I was behind a computer. I didn't experience any of this stuff that, all these people talk about, combat this, combat that. I mean, I can't sleep. Okay, that's okay. That's okay. I take meds for that, or I can't do X and Y, Z. Like physically, I have nightmares here and there. Okay, but I didn't experience combat, right? And and you hear this being said often enough, and you're like, but you still need to go get help. No, but I didn't see the stuff that so and so seen, right? I'm no, Medal of Honor recipient. Like I'm good. Like I'm good. It's like this feeling of feeling unworthy of asking for help or receiving help.
Yeah.
Like
So
we wear this Superman cape, for the better lack of words, and this is why I titled this "Taking Off the Cape." Like let me hold on to my trauma because that's my cape. That's how I function. Like, what is that?
yeah, so you've hit me with like 4 things that I'm gonna hit here. I was like,
You're welcome.
man,
You're
like,
welcome, Tim.
it's
You're
perfect,
welcome.
right? So I want to start out with one, if you're not infantry, if you're not, what I would, a combat MOS, one of the realities that I think I struggle the most with over the years working with veterans and, knowing veterans in those pieces is the reality that regardless of your occupation, the one thing about the military is it's a machine, right? It's designed in a way to achieve a certain goal, whatever that may be, and that may require life. And so, regardless who you are, what you've done, the reality is at some point you had to sign a piece of paper at maybe 17, 18, 19 years old that said, you know what? Not only am I willing to go do this thing, leave my family, leave everything I may have known, I may not come back to it. That it may be done, and that I'm willing to accept that risk for this purpose or this mission or this goal. So that's the first one. Okay. So I just want to hit that one of like, if you're out there and you're thinking about your mental health and you're struggling with pieces of those, that is something to think about because the reality is you are a veteran. Combat, non-combat, pogue, grunt, whatever you want to call it. The reality is you did something that a very, very small percentage of the population has done. And so just because I'm a nerd, less than 1% of the American population has fought in two of the longest campaigns in American history.
Wow.
Right? This is a policing action. It's not a war, but it's very much a war, if you will, for 2 decades. Think about it. And it's still ongoing. We've got people deploying right now. But the veteran population as a whole, so if you take Vietnam, everybody, we still only make up approximately 7% of the entire population. So we're a very small group.
Oh, wow.
So that's the first one. So I want to hit that one. I want to go back for a second. And I want to hit on the Vietnam veterans that either may watch this video, or you guys might find yourself in this unique position where you say, you know what, I'm not using substances. I'm not using alcohol. I'm not using drugs. I'm not using these things. All I do is go to work and drive through. Right. So I know you mentioned, a lot of these Vietnam guys get to this point in life and it starts coming up, and we're seeing it a lot with Vietnam veterans where they're suddenly struggling, and it's been decades.
Right.
One of the unique things I find about veterans is their ability to drive on. They push through, and they just make things happen, right? So work can be something, at least in my clinical experience, my training, and in my personal life that I see, veterans have a tendency to try to drive on and put their head down. I had a veteran that I was talking with at one point in time in my life, and he was a Vietnam veteran, and he was contemplating reaching out for services. And he had been through just an awful experience in Vietnam, but he, one, didn't feel like he should take services from other people because it had been so long.
Right.
And two, he couldn't figure out why this stuff was coming up decades and decades later. But he felt miserable. It had beat on him. He had literally beat himself down into the ground for years. Wow. And I finally looked at this guy and I said, these things had happened. How old were you? And he said, well, I was around 20. Mm-hmm. I said, okay. I said, how old are you now? He's, well, I'm like 74, right? So you've got this punk kid sitting across from him talking to a 74-year-old man, right? And I finally just looked at him. I said, don't you think 50 years has been enough? Don't you think you've punished yourself enough? Right? I look at me and you, and it's been about a decade since we've been in the middle of a combat zone, right? And I imagine a lot of you out there that are struggling, it's been a minute. Haven't you punished yourself enough? You don't have to do this stuff alone, right? Isn't it fair to say that you weren't alone when this stuff developed? Why the hell would you be fighting alone now?
Right. Bro, like, listen, that's real. Like, you wouldn't go on patrol by yourself. Nobody is that stupid to go on patrol by themselves. I'm sorry. I've never seen it in any tactical book where it says, hey, it's a one-man patrol, go at it. And even if you did go, there's always somebody doing some overwatch. So why are you tackling this thing alone? Like, this is the most dangerous part of life, going through it by yourself. Yeah. And you have people ready to help you at any given time, but that thing that keeps holding you back, that's literally got your hand almost stuck to your side from raising it, is pride. Like, let's call it what it is. There's a fear of being found out. There's a fear of failing. There's a fear of, if I ask for help, I'm going to be seen as weak. If I ask for help, somebody's going to make fun of me. If I ask for help, I can't live with, so-and-so, gave their life. Who am I? It's like that survivor's remorse. Mm-hmm. Like, these are the feelings that I felt. And this is like I can't talk about anybody else's, experience, but mine. These are things that I struggled with coming out. These are things that I sat on the edge of my bed contemplating suicide because I didn't feel like I belonged here. I didn't feel like I wanted to be here. I didn't feel comfortable asking for help. I didn't want to be here, Tim. So, like, I get it. Like I get it. But then the other part that I also get is, bro, I want to be around a whole lot longer. Like bump taking that out. Like, I want to be here a whole lot longer. And I had to get to a place where I valued myself enough to say, you know what, if nothing else, at least I get a chance to talk to somebody. And it's led me to a path of self-understanding, self-identifying. Like, it's put me in a position where I can be here having this conversation with you. Like, there are people who would love to have these conversations, but are no longer here. That's just a sad point. So it's like anybody who's struggling with whatever it is that you're struggling with right now, there are Tim, he is right here. Like, for real, like, reach out to him for something. Like, if nothing else, just to have a conversation. Maybe a beer and a conversation. I don't know. If you live in West Virginia, I don't I don't know. I don't think it's always down for a beer, right? But it's okay. Like, it's okay to be vulnerable. Like, we also have this thing about us men, military service members. Vulnerability ain't seen as it ain't as sexy. Yeah, it's you're gonna be looked at as a weakling, as a weak, link in the chain.
Yeah.
But asking for help requires a level of vulnerability.
I agree. And it's not easy. I think that's the thing we're trying to tell people, especially in this talk is, we're not trying to minimize what people have been through. We're also not saying, like, what you're doing, if it's working for you, putting your head down is getting you through to something. Okay. Like, we get, like, sometimes in life that has to happen.
Right.
But I do think it's worth the talk to say, am I doing this in a way that I'm actually enjoying my life? Am I living my life? Right? Or am I just getting through my life? A minute ago, you were talking about honoring or punishing. And, that's one that hits for me. I see it all the time with veterans. I'm guilty of it myself. What do you do with these losses? What do you do with these problems when they happen? And for me, like, I think about, veterans all the time have tattoos, right? So I'm guilty. I showed you this earlier, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm guilty. I've got a whole half sleeve here, and it's probably the worst tattoo as far as the ink doesn't stick, right? It looks terrible. But to tell you guys what this is the folded flag for my brother from his funeral, right? It's a cross with dog tags on it, right? And like I said earlier, I absolutely would not tattoo the United States Air Force on me. I'm not doing it. It's not happening. I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm a Marine, like, and I love my brother, but he doesn't get that one. So, no.
Y'all gotta understand, this is a hardcore Marine saying, hey, listen, the Air Force ain't going nowhere on my body.
So now, in all fairness to the Air Force, though, I'll throw it out there. So if you guys can see, I don't know, but there's a plane under there. I did get a tattoo of a plane in the wing numbers for his birthday, right?
Fair enough. I love it.
So I love my Air Force crew too. Just throw that out there. But going back to that, right? So you think about tattoos, you think about bracelets, right? You think about these things that we have as constant reminders. And the one thing that I really try to hammer with veterans is why? Why are you wearing these things, right? Are you wearing these things because this is something for you that you get to remember, right? But what does that memory do for you? Is this one of those things where when I lost this person, right, when they are no longer here, did I find myself in this unique position where I didn't want to forget them? I didn't want to leave them behind. And so essentially what I did was I stopped living. Wow. I stayed put. Some veterans, that very much happens. If I move on, I feel like I'm leaving my brothers and sisters behind. And that's why we talk about punishing, right? When you look down at that bracelet and you think about those tattoos, we were just laughing about tattoos of my brother's death. Think about that for a second.
Right.
I don't hold it against him that he was Air Force. I think about it, but I don't do that, right?
Right.
But the reality is, honoring is recognizing those people who realizing when I look at that bracelet or when I look at that tattoo, what am I going to do to make them proud? How am I going to move forward in my life that I pull them with me? Instead of me staying back there with them, how do I bring them with me and move on in my life to a point where they would be proud of me, that I can be happy and show them, you know what, this is worth it.
Right.
You know?
Wow. So it's weird that you even say that though, because a lot of veterans. Okay, so I remember when we were about to deploy,
Yeah.
and everybody's sitting around talking like, hey, if I don't come back, I want you guys to celebrate and party like you've never partied before. Like have fun, like live your lives, like enjoy every part of life. Like I don't believe in any of those who have gone before us that would say, y'all, hey, listen, stay stuck. Remember me this way. Like our remembrance shouldn't be a punishment. But unfortunately, because how we view it, like, okay, I don't want to move forward because that might, I feel guilty. I feel guilty, for moving forward. I feel guilty for living my life because somebody else doesn't get to live theirs. And I know for a fact that nobody that's gone on would say, no, be miserable. I don't know anybody like that. And we continually punish ourselves by putting ourselves through this ringer of how much pain can I endure before it's too late. Because I believe there's nothing irreversible. Like in context of, listen, it's never too late. It's never too late to get help. But you have to initiate that part of getting help. Like I don't know, like is there a point where you get to where it is too late, Tim? Because I don't think there is. Unless, I mean, like, technically, is there?
So in my experience, my answer would be no. Unless it gets to the point where you actually take your life. Right? I've worked with people with suicide attempts, with constant suicidal ideations that think about every day waking up, man, I wonder what it'd be like if I just wasn't here anymore. But that reality is, if you're willing to work on it, if you're willing to reach out and you're willing to do these things, I would agree with you completely. I don't think there's ever a point where it's too late. The only thing I'll ask people is, at what point are you willing to quit losing time? Many of you all find yourself in this position where you feel like you're just going through the motions. You're disconnected. You don't feel like you're really in part of your life, right? Moments where you feel like you should be happy and you just don't feel that way, right? You feel disconnected, right? The longer you wait, in my experience, that time you don't get back. So I don't think it ever comes a point in time where it's too late, but I do feel like you do lose time. You lose time to make those relationships, to spend that time with your kids, to date your wife or go out with a partner, these different pieces. You do lose that opportunity, but it's never too late to get started on this stuff.
Because I think there's also a hesitance, again, from the older generation before us, where it's like, man, it's been 30 years, bro. Like, why is it finally coming up? And honestly, when you get a chance to sit back and think about life, certain things start coming up. And sometimes you travel down a road that you haven't been in a long time, and you forget that there are landmines everywhere, bro. You forget that there are memory landmines everywhere, and you keep stepping on them, and you're thinking, shoot, I have forgot that, but now it's something triggered that, or and you're going down this dark path by yourself because, again, you finally have a time to relax. You're off of work, you've worked yourself to death enough. Now you're retired, because majority of the Vietnam generation is retired now, from their jobs if they wanted to retire. and they're finally sitting at home thinking about what happened. And for
Mhm.
a lot of them, it's finally hitting them because again, work is a drug in a sense, like it gives you the same fulfillment as or the same high. So when you have worked yourself to death you literally have worked to forget, but your mind doesn't ever forget. It just kind of hides it. It fools you to believe that you forgot, but then you're finally sitting at home and you're thinking. And the worst thing you can do is sit and think about something terrible, traumatic that happened by yourself without having somebody to help you go through that experience. And now you see, a lot of veteran communities are coming up, right? There's there's literally almost like on every corner of Facebook, you see a veteran community,
Yeah.
but not all of them are created equal. And this is no means, I haven't been a part of all of them, so I don't know how they all function. But some of the ones that I've seen or been a part of that I just had to get out of, they weren't offering help. It was literally perpetuating the same toxicity that crosses over from the military of, oh, nah, man, you're good. Like, it's okay. Just like they're still put a band-aid on a wound that needs to get like that needs surgery, but you're still putting a band-aid on it. And they're not offering any real help, like any real solutions. But rarely, once again, it's people aren't asking for help because of the stigma of, I don't want to look weak. I don't want to be I don't want to be the guy that people talk about, oh yeah, he finally broke and he finally went to go get help. And it's like, if those people who you think are making fun of, like, I don't know, the best way that I can say, the people who you think are going to care about you aren't the ones who are answering their phones. They haven't cared enough to check on you. So why does it matter? The ones that care about you do care about you and do want to go take you to go get help or help you go get help. It's not the ones that quote unquote will be, oh man, I don't want to be made fun of. By who? Like I want to see these people because I don't know, Tim. I don't know anybody in, I guess, in our circle of people who we know, combined together,
Yeah.
that wouldn't raise up or wouldn't offer help if somebody asked for it. Like, that's a beautiful part about being part of a veteran community, but you have to ask for it. And if you need to, go outside and ask for outside help. You don't have to ask help from a veteran community. Go outside and seek help elsewhere.
Yeah,
So
I'll say this. I agree with you. I think that it's one of those things where a lot of times, if you're going to ask for help, so the only thing I'm going to add to that is be sure what you're asking for, right?
mm,
So one of the things we do as veterans is we lay subtle hints, but we don't actually sometimes explicitly lay out what we need. And so a lot of times veterans, I see it all the time, right, in these groups where they'll make comments of like, oh, how are you doing? Or give you shit, right? Because
right.
that's the normal MO. They don't realize you've actually gotten to the point that you've gotten to. Because if they had, a lot of these veterans across the board would reach out and be like, okay, how can I help you? What can I do? I do throw that back on people at times of, making sure that you're actually reaching out and being clear in what you need back,
Mm.
right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, let me ask you this question. Is there such thing as, and I see it mostly in veteran communities, is, well, I got PTSD, so I should be allowed to do whatever, right? Or I'm going to hold on to this PTSD diagnosis because it allows me to get away with stuff.
Mhm.
Or it's my identity now because I was diagnosed by it. Now it's my identity that I get to be able to walk around and flash. Nobody likes that guy, right? But then it's like, What is that? What causes that?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. So yes, so I see that a lot across the board, but in two different categories. And so I want to make sure I clarify the two categories. So the first category that I see are some of these people that, at times, let's be honest, there's some of us veterans that we fought for our country, we did these things, and there is some entitlement there. There are some of those guys. Now, what I also see though is the second group of people. And so, one of the things that is really difficult with PTSD and the military is really starting to examine and pay attention to PTSD in me, right? So
Mm,
that last one, when you said that, like some veterans may find themselves in this unique position, and it's really hard as a provider for me to see people find themselves in this position where they identify with their diagnosis. What I mean by that is whether you have depression, whether you have anxiety or PTSD, right? From a psychological and psychiatric perspective, those are simply words that describe symptoms that you have. So there's something you struggle with over a period of time, but that's it. It should not define you, right? When we think about people who are struggling with these things, so PTSD specifically, I hear veterans say all the time, well, I'm a PTSD vet. No, you're a veteran who is recovering from PTSD,
mm, wow.
right? It's one of those things where PTSD isn't going to go away, right? You may maintain those symptoms, and I come from a recovery model, so some people may disagree with me, but PTSD is there, but you can learn to manage and adapt to those problems or those symptoms in a way that you can actually get back into your life and engage. Now, with that said, if you don't tend to those PTSD symptoms, if you don't pay attention to those struggles over time, any problem, right? If you think about a beach ball, you can shove it under the water and you're fine. Most of the guys in the military, if you think about it, y'all big boys, you can keep the beach ball under the water,
Right.
right? But the reality is, if you get real complacent in your mental health treatment, a lot of times that ball will eventually come flying out,
Mm,
and it's going to come out somewhere, but you may not know where, right? That's when we see people who unload on their partner or get mad in traffic to an over exuberant extent,
right.
and they're not sure exactly why it went that far, but then they feel bad because it got that far.
Mm,
So for those veterans who feel like they identify with their diagnosis, I would challenge you to say, are you more than depression? Are you more than anxiety? Are you more than PTSD? Because my bet, you are.
wow. Wow. I love the fact that said you are more than your own diagnosis. Because often enough, listen, when that uniform comes off, we honest and this again, I can only talk about my own struggles. I lost who I was, bro. Like I didn't have a sense of an identity. Like I didn't know who I was. I went from wearing a uniform one day to not wearing one. Like who am I outside my uniform? And people, okay, listen, people might be like, but I mean, but really though, but like especially the ones who hated being in the military, like man, I never identify myself with that junk anyway. Like I'm good. Like, okay, that's fine. But there's a point where that comes back, right? And you say, man, who am I? Like because I literally had engulfed my whole entire identity as who I was in my uniform. So when it came off, I didn't know what to do. Tim, like I was lost. I was lost as a dog, man. Like I was like, yo, okay, all right, I'm Theo. Okay, I know that, but shoot, I hadn't even heard my first name called in a long time. Like, unless I'm home, like I was going by my last name, right? I was going about rank and last name. And you don't hear that and you get confused because for a long time you're told this is what your rank is, this is what your name is. And you lose this sense of identity. So the next thing that you know how to cling to is anything that attaches you back to that uniform, which is you hold on to these experiences, you hold on to these past failures, past regrets, past whatever they were, and you allow them to identify you. But I love the fact that you said you are more than your diagnosis. You're more than your uniform. You're more than what your rank was. It don't matter what you got out as. You're more than that. But how do we get to that point of understanding that we're more than that, though, Tim?
And that's a great question. I think back to people who are struggling with PTSD and depression and all these diagnoses, and I don't think you're alone. So Theo, like I'm gonna throw that out there. I don't think you're by yourself. I have guys constantly tell me, Doc, hell, I didn't think I was gonna live this long. I didn't I didn't think I was gonna make it here. You know what? I miss being a part of something bigger than myself. Right?
Wow.
When you had this unique meeting, and there was no way for you to do anything else except for fight and do something that was going to impact so many people. Right? Because the reality is every service member is vital. Right? And that's why I say, like, it doesn't matter if your MOS, your rank, you've uniquely done something that can't be replicated in a way because you were needed at that time and you stepped up.
Right.
The challenge, and this is the challenge, is how do you step up now? Where do you find that investment? Is your new mission your family? Because you probably got a kid who's looking up to you, right? How do you get out of your own way to figure out what it is that you want? So I will go back to when you identify with PTSD and it solely becomes who you are, it's really hard to see anything moving forward when you're spending all that time looking back.
Wow. Wow. Tim, listen, we've been talking for almost an hour, bro.
It's been a while. Yeah.
And I didn't know how this conversation would honestly impact me, but man, it's the more I study this stuff, the more I read books and the more I should watch documentaries or listen to podcasts, I realize that there's this common thread of I miss combat. I miss the adrenaline. I miss the rush. I miss the camaraderie. I miss my friends. I miss everything. And we romanticize the past because we've gone through it. We romanticize it. We forget that there are other parts that weren't that great. And it seems like our conversations, anytime that you talk to a veteran, somehow you're going to end up with like a couple war stories put in there somewhere. Great. And that's kind of like lifting up a daisy chained IED, right? It's like you are literally starting to poke at it because that's going to be a trigger to something else, to another memory that 2 days from now can trigger an event, like a mental event that you didn't even think, like, I didn't think that conversation would have anything to do with that. But it's like all these untreated stuff, all these untreated past traumatic events, all these things that, all these capes that you've put on for the sake of looking strong and feeling strong and not looking like you're breakable or holding on so tight to your service connection that I can't appear weak in front of people. My family looks up to me or my kids look up to me who, it's like you're passing on your traumas through your stubbornness to ask for help. And it's like, it's just as simple to Roger up and say, hey, I need help. I mean, nobody in a firefight running out of ammo is just gonna, I'm out. No, you're gonna ask for more ammo. You're gonna find a way to get more ammo. So why would you do that at home? Why wouldn't you raise your hand up and say, hey, throw me a mag? Like, I need help. I need assistance. If you are pinned down somewhere, you calling in fire, right? Why wouldn't you do that at home? And I'm using all these terms to not trigger anything, but I'm using these terms because they're familiar terms to a lot of veterans. Because you go through it in combat rehearsals, you go through it, in trainings, like, hey, what happens when you are here? When you are pinned down or when you are stuck, you need to call for help. So now you're outside your element. Like, mind you, when you're calling in for fire, you're not afraid of looking weak. Like, you're not gonna think, man, the motormen are gonna think, man, like, I know I'm gonna get made fun of as soon as I get back. No, you're thinking, hey, I need help. Somebody hit, shoot something. Like, like, listen, I
Little
need
help.
something.
Little
I
help.
need somebody. Shoot something, kill something. I need somebody.
Yeah.
But now you're at home and you're not calling anybody. It's like the worst thing ever, to be stuck by yourself and not have nobody help you out. But people don't know that you need help until you ask for help.
Yes. And so I'm going to leave with, I know I'm aware of the time, so I'm mindful of the time. So I don't want to keep,
No, you're good.
keep
You're
talking,
good.
right, as far as that goes. But you're right. The reality is you have to be willing to ask for help. And so I kind of want to leave it off on 2 points. The first one being, first of all, I love quotes. I just do. I feel like they just, whatever. I don't know. Like they hammer home points that sometimes maybe you don't understand, or, especially like me and you, we may not be able to speak eloquently enough for y'all to get this, right? So, so bear with us. But I go back and I think about, these different quotes and these different sayings. And so I wonder if this will fit, but I think about like Douglas MacArthur, right? Mm-hmm. For you all that don't know, Army general, right? He at one point said, it's fatal to enter war without the will to win it. The reality is you can have all the awareness in the world of your mental health, but if you're not willing to step up and fight for what you're doing here at home, your family, your friends, the things that you deserve, the people who you lost and left behind, right? Pull them forward with you. Right? It's harder to step up and fight and let people know that you need help and to get into treatment than it is to pretend like you don't have a problem. Wow. When you talk about taking off the cape, for me, Superman is still Superman when he sets down the cape. The reality is there's going to be moments where you're going to have to take that cape off and sit it down. Because you know what? I need to get this fixed. I need to work on this a little bit. And then I'm going to step back up and get back to what I was doing. Because guess what? If you've got kids, if you've got family, if you've got friends, they're looking to you. But you should be looking to you, because the reality is you can do this, but you shouldn't have to do it alone. And that's what I think me and you've mainly tried to hammer that point across tonight. Come on, Superman,
100%.
Take off the cape, sit it down, reach out. There are guys out there like me and Theo that get it. We may not understand exactly what you've been through, because trust me, I don't. I ain't got a clue what you've been through.
Right.
I might have an idea, but a lot of us are willing to listen.
Bro, that can't add more to that. that was a great ending point. Bro, thank you so much for your time, for willingness to get in here and have this conversation. Man, I appreciate what you do for veterans. I appreciate what your work is consisted of, bro. Man, it's been forever. Let's not wait another 10 years. Let's definitely keep having these conversations. I look forward to a part 2